Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I can see more and more people are logging on, so thank you for joining us. As people join, I'll just make a few introductory remarks. My name is Carla Whitaker. I work for San Diego and Imperial County's CalSOAP. That stands for the California Student Opportunity and Access Program. We're a college access program. We're run through the California Student Aid Commission and UC San Diego. And our whole goal is to try to help students and parents understand college, the college going process, and an important part of that is the financial aid process. So what this webinar is about tonight is going to be about financial aid, giving you the updates on the new FAFSA, telling you what to expect on the FAFSA. And this is really important, is that if you're going to be filling out the FAFSA, you can get an FSA ID now. The FAFSA itself hasn't opened yet, but the FSA ID process is open. So if you are a 12th grader or a parent of a 12th grader, you might be wanting some information on how do I create this FSA ID and what am I going to need to have ready. So we're going to get into that. A few other remarks is that you'll notice that although you might not be able to use the chat, that you'll be able to use the Q&A. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, it might be under 3 dots that says more. It might just have a Q&A bubble, but there's a place where you can put a question in the Q&A, and we encourage you to ask any questions that you have along the way. And I have a few panelists here today that are going to help me. They are some of our professional student staff members at CalSOAP that are college readiness coach trained, and they are leads. And so today we have Tori and we have Charmaine. They're going to give us some help, and they're going to be some of the ones helping to answer your questions. So if you do have a question in the Q&A, one of those two will probably be typing an answer back to you. If there's something that they think will apply to a lot of people, they might unmute and ask me the question so that I can address it out loud. And the most common question I get is there going to be a recording made available of this? And will we have the slide deck made available to us? And yes to both of those. At the CalSOAP website, where you probably signed up for this, it's calsoapsandiego.org. We have a webinar/blog tab and section, and starting tomorrow, the recording will be posted there. It'll be available for anybody to see, regardless of whether they signed up for this tonight or not, regardless of whether they attended tonight or not. And also we'll have a PDF or some version of the slide deck available for you as well. All right. I'm going to go ahead and launch into this. Let's see. We already are getting some questions, so I know that Tori and Charmaine will be doing their best to answer those. But if they have, I'm going to get into some general information. So as I'm sharing my slides, I can't necessarily see the questions myself, so I'll wait and see if they want to. If they want me to address any of them. All right, give me one moment to share my screen, please. All right, so what we're going to go over tonight, just very briefly, we're going to understand all the forms of financial aid, hopefully. We're going to understand what an FSA ID is and why you might need one, and what information you're going to need in order to complete your FSA ID if in fact you do need to create one. So again, we are CalSOAP. We are on YouTube, we're on the internet, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram, we have an X/Twitter. So if you follow social media, please follow us. Our whole mission is increase college going rates, especially among first generation and low income students. And so we serve a variety of students throughout San Diego and Imperial counties with things like workshops and programs and webinars like this. So hopefully there's something that you can learn from CalSOAP and something you can get out of CalSOAP. So what is financial aid? Financial aid is any money that's being given to a student to pursue higher education after high school, any kind of higher education. That can include vocational school, that can include a university, it can include a community college, it could be interstate or out of state. There's lots of different forms of financial aid. So who is eligible to receive it? Most people are eligible to receive some form of financial aid. In the case of the FAFSA, it's usually US citizens or eligible non-citizens. And then in the case of state aid, even students who might not have a social security number, but might have lived in California for at least 3 years would be eligible as well. So what sources, where does this money magically come from? In a lot of cases, it might come from the federal government, especially in the cases of something like a federal or Pell Grant. It might come from the state where you're going to school, in this case, California. It might come from a college itself. It might come from a private organization or a business. It depends what form the aid is coming in. And there's 3 types of basic money that we want to talk about when we're saying a financial aid package. There's the free money that doesn't have to be repaid, and that's grants. I like that the word is grants because it reminds me of the word great, and a grant is great because you don't have to pay it back. So if you're offered a grant, always say yes is my advice. All right, don't decline a grant. A grant is free money that you do not need to repay. And so I always encourage people, if they are offered a grant, to go ahead and take that grant. There are also loans. Now, loans are borrowed money. Although they are an investment in your future and an investment in your degree, they do have to be repaid eventually, and they do have to be repaid usually with interest. So that's a consideration. A lot of people would rather go grants and scholarships and work if they can and avoid loans if possible. It's not always possible, depends on a lot of individual situations. Work study is another form of financial aid. Now, work study means that the student can get a job while they are a college student. The job might be on or off campus, but it's usually affiliated in some way with the college. Maybe it's through the college's, job search engine or something like that. And basically the money that they earn an hourly rate. Maybe they work 5 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, or 25 hours a week, whatever it is, they're earning the same hourly wage they normally would, but the money might be coming from a source like the federal government in the case of federal work study. So that is work study in a nutshell. So again, grants are free money. And some examples of grants are a federal Pell Grant, a Cal Grant that could be used in the state of California. The Promise Grant is one that can be used at California community colleges. There are also grants from universities. For example, a UC system has something called the Blue and Gold program, which is like a tuition payment grant that if your family income is under $80,000 annually, the UCs provide a grant for the tuition part of your cost of attendance. And then there are private scholarships as well. Well, where do these come from? Is there some kind of grant application? Well, basically the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, those are the grant applications that you'll use. And we'll talk a little bit about who would fill out one or who would fill out the other. But basically when you fill out a FAFSA, you're applying for all of those at once. Or when you fill out a DREAM Act, you're applying for all of those that you qualify for simultaneously. So it's kind of nice that there's just one form that can possibly get you multiple grants, or at least you can find out if you're eligible for those grants. So the free application for federal student aid, notice the first F is for free. All right, so we want to emphasize that you shouldn't be paying to fill out a FAFSA. All right, and if you just go to studentaid.gov, that is where you can get started on creating an FSA ID, creating an account, or logging into account. Maybe if you're a parent and you already have an FSA ID from when you went to school yourself, or maybe from an older sibling or something like that. But that is where everybody starts at studentaid.gov. If the student has a social security number, they would be eligible to fill out a FAFSA. Or if they're a legal non-resident, like for example, if they had a green card, they would also be eligible to fill out the FAFSA. This application would determine if they're eligible for any federal money or any California state money at all. So that's where everybody wants to get started, is studentaid.gov. What if you don't have a social security number, if you're undocumented? So if you are DACA status, deferred action for childhood arrivals, if you don't have US citizenship, but you have maybe been in the US for at least 3 years and gone to high school in the US for at least 3 years, in that case, you would fill out a very similar form, but it's called the DREAM Act. Nobody fills out both the FAFSA and the DREAM Act. It's always either one or the other. They're essentially the same form. They ask the same questions. The big difference is that if you're filling out the DREAM Act, unfortunately, you're not eligible for federal aid. Like you wouldn't be receiving a federal Pell Grant if you were filling out the DREAM Act. However, there are a lot of grants, like for example, the Cal Grant or the Promise Grant, that you would be eligible for by filling out the DREAM Act. Again, it's either one or the other. Nobody fills out both. Everybody fills out either the FAFSA, depending if the student has a social security number or is eligible, or if they don't, they could fill out the DREAM Act. There is one other category of students who might not be able to fill out either one. And this is students who might be here on a special immigrant visa. Like, for example, a common one we see is an F or a J visa. For those students, they can't fill out the FAFSA and they also can't fill out the DREAM Act. And I will talk a little bit later about some options for those students, but sometimes they have to look for private scholarships where that are for international students, for example, and you can find those through FastWeb, EduPass, a couple of other organizations. All right, so I want to talk about the Promise Grant because this is a wonderful grant. It basically waives tuition for California community colleges. If you are a high school student, let's say you're graduating this year, let's say you're going to graduate in June of 2024, okay? And then you're going to start, and you decided to start at a community college. If you go right from high school full-time into that community college, basically, if you apply to the college on time, and if you fill out either a FAFSA or DREAM Act, you are almost certain to get the Promise Grant, which is basically a scholarship or grant that gives you 2 years, that's 4 semesters of full-time tuition at a community college. That's your whole freshman and sophomore year of college, even if you're going to go on from there and apply to transfer to a university like your junior and senior year. The first 2 years of college could be completed at a community college. And basically the promise is for free tuition. That doesn't mean that every other expense will be covered, like housing and food. That depends on your what comes back from your FAFSA or DREAM Act aid report. But the Community College Promise Grant is available for pretty much any student. So although you do have to complete either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, and you do have to fill out an application to that college, the campus might have their own Promise Grant application as well. So there might be one for the San Diego Community College District, which is San Diego, Mesa, and Miramar, or Grossmont and Cuyamaca have one, Southwestern has one. Every community college in California has their version of the Promise Grant, but you do need to make sure basically to just fill out their free college application, fill out the free financial aid form, and then you'll probably find out that if you are committing to going to a community college, you'll most likely qualify for 2 years of free tuition. And that is regardless of the parent income, unless the parent income is really high, like above, I want to say something like $300,000 annually. Unless it's above that, you are probably going to qualify for free tuition with the promise at a community college. So it's a pretty fantastic opportunity. Scholarships are another form of financial aid that are considered a gift. They're not a loan. They do not have to be repaid, and they can be based on whatever the giver wants to make the criteria. So in other words, it can be merit-based. It can be on something like your academics. It can be based on something like your community service, your involvement in sports or leadership, or what you want to study. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of scholarships. Many are targeted towards specific groups of people. So there might be scholarships that are specifically for students who are Latino, Latinx. There might be scholarships for students going into a STEM field. There might be scholarships for students who, it could be any number of things. it might be for, it might be a gender-based scholarship, like this is a scholarship for girls or for boys. So whatever the person who's giving the scholarship or the organization that's giving the scholarship wants to emphasize, that's who they're going to give it to. Maybe they want to give it to a continuing student who's a parent themselves and is going back to school. Maybe they want to give it to someone who has military background, military family, military involvement. So it just, there's a lot of different criterias and a lot of different scholarship applications. So the FAFSA and the DREAM Act are pretty easy in the sense of it's just one form and you just fill it out once a year. Scholarships, on the other hand, can be tricky because there's so many different ones. What we would suggest is start looking for scholarships now. Whatever grade you're in, if that's 12th grade, start looking now. A really good place that has a great scholarship database is called fastweb.com. And that's a great one because you can enter the information about you as a student, my grade, my GPA, my involvement, my ethnicity, what I want to major in, all that information. And then based on that, FastWeb will give you a list of, okay, well, based on what you put in, here's the scholarships that you might want to apply for. Also, a lot of school districts have platforms where they also have scholarships available on things like Naviance or Zello. So depending on what district you're in, they might have CaliforniaColleges.edu, a partnership with that, like the Grossmont district does. There's a lot of places to find scholarships. At CalSOAP, we are always posting about different scholarships, different places to apply, different deadlines. On the CalSOAP San Diego website, we have a scholarships tab where we list applications and we try to group them by the deadlines. So it's like the November ones that are due in November, ones that are due in December, ones that are due in January, etc. So there's a lot of places to find scholarships, and that can be a blessing, but also it can make it kind of difficult because instead of just one application, sometimes you're filling out a lot of different applications for scholarships. A common question I get, and something I want to mention, is that people say, what if I get more than one scholarship? Can I accept more than one? And the students who are here, who are college students themselves, will tell you definitely yes, that sometimes you get 2 or 3 or multiple scholarships that are offered to you. They usually all go to your college's financial aid office, and the college then applies them all to any kind of school related expenses. And if there's any left over, but they still haven't applied to the entire cost of attendance, they'll actually give it back to you as a student directly into your account. So yes, you can earn multiple scholarships, and if you do, then you can apply multiple scholarships. Like, you don't have to pick and choose. You can usually accept all the ones that are offered to you if you're lucky enough to be offered multiple scholarships. All right, what are some other types of financial aid? Loans, again, this is money that you borrow and you have to repay with interest. Students and families are not required to accept any federal or state loans that are offered to them. So if you fill out the FAFSA or DREAM Act and it comes back that they offer you a loan as part of your financial aid package, you can always decline it. So just don't know that you're not stuck. If you're offered a loan, hey, that's great. They offered it to you. You can accept it. You can decline it. You can accept it for a smaller amount if you want. Like, I don't need to borrow that much. And to be eligible for a federal or state loan, the student does have to complete either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's not the only place to get a loan, though. You could go to your local credit union or bank or something like that. So there's other places to get loans as well. Federal work study, this is where, again, you are employed part-time while you're enrolled in college. It's available to undergraduate, graduates, and professional students with financial needs. So you might or might not qualify depending on your family income. It's administered by schools that participate in federal work study, which is most colleges. And basically, the only thing you have to do to find out if you're eligible for it is fill out the FAFSA, and they'll let you know if you get any work study or not. All right, so let's talk about the actual steps that you can take next. And now we'll be getting into how is the FAFSA changing and how do I get an FSA ID? So the FAFSA Simplification Act was passed by Congress, and it is allowing for the first major change to the FAFSA in 40 years. For 40 years, we have been saying EFC, expected family contribution. That is going away. For a number of years, males have been required to sign up for the selective service. There's been a lot of things that have been the same for many, many, many years that are changing this year. Normally, the FAFSA would open October 1st. If you're a 12th grader or a family of a 12th grader, you might have noticed it hasn't opened yet. It's not opening until December. They haven't actually given us a date, but we suspect it will be late December. We think it's going to be probably as late as possible because they're still working out the kinks and trying to finalize their protocols. But the FAFSA is not, and the DREAM Act also is not going to open until late December. Also, the priority deadline for filling out the FAFSA or DREAM Act is almost always March 2nd. This year, because of the late release of the FAFSA and the DREAM Act, they're pushing that back to April 2nd is the priority deadline to give you a little bit more breathing room. In terms of what's the difference between the accounts between the FAFSA and the DREAM Act? So for the FAFSA, if the student's going to fill out the FAFSA, they will need to create an FSA ID. For the DREAM Act, the student does not create an FSA ID. It's kind of a different process. And then for the FAFSA, the student also usually determines which parent or parents will be the contributor on the student's FAFSA, whereas on the DREAM Act, the parent does not have to create an FSA ID themselves. On the FAFSA, if you're a contributor parent, okay, you will need to create an FSA ID. And in a second, we'll get into like, are both parents contributors or just one or the other? We'll get into that in a second. If the contributor parent does not have a social security number, they will still need to create an FSA ID. That didn't used to be true. It used to be you could print out the page, the parent could sign it in ink and mail it in via the post office. They are no longer doing that. They're actually having all parents who are contributors to a student's FAFSA create an FSA ID, but instead of based on social security number, they'll be basing it on a few other things. Like they might ask a little bit about credit history or employment history or things like that to make sure that you are who you say you are, but they will not require a social security number. And then once the FAFSA actually opens in late December of this year, the student is going to log in using their FSA ID, and then they can invite the parent who is the contributor or the parents who are contributors to contribute to the FAFSA to fill out their portion. And it's the same for the DREAM Act. It will also open probably the same day as the FAFSA, December 2023. And that's when the student will be able to start filling it out. Okay, so this does not apply to the DREAM Act. The FSA ID for right now, we only have the information for students who have a social security number. So if you are a student who does not have a social security number, this is not going to apply to you probably. There's actually a webinar by the federal government tomorrow releasing the information on what to do if a parent does not have a social security number. But if you are a student who's going to be filling out the FAFSA, you can create an FSA ID now. And this is the process. This is the information that they're going to be asking you for. Your name, and it's going to need to match the name that is probably on paperwork, such as your birth certificate or social security card. All right, so that's important that the name matches. I know a lot of people might have a double last name, a hyphen last name. It's important that it matches, okay? Your exact birth date, all right? Your social security number, a mailing address for you, a phone number for you, and an email address where they can contact you. We strongly recommend you do not use your school or district email, like if it ends in @sandy.net, @GUHSD, at any time it's a school-related, school-generated email, you usually only have access to that till the end of your senior year. And once that ends, you can no longer get email there, and they're going to keep communicating with you all the way into and through college. So we strongly recommend a personal email such as a Gmail, an Outlook, an iCloud, something like that is what we're going to strongly recommend you use. Also, sometimes if they try to email you, for example, at sandy.net, sandy.net will only, the student email accounts only receive emails from other sandy.net email accounts. So I, as an outside person, like I have a UCSD email, whenever I email a student who has a sandy.net email address, it bounces back to me. There's a firewall and it doesn't let me contact you. So that's why another reason why they recommend don't use your school generated email, use something like a Gmail. After completing that FSA ID, students need to write down or digitally save a couple pieces of information that are really important. Their FSA ID username, their FSA ID password. They'll also be given a backup code, okay, just in case. So those are things that you don't want to lose, and you want to have a place where you can keep that information safe. This is some new terminology this year. We used to say you're either the student or you're the parent or parents. Now they've changed the terminology to the contributors. So a contributor is anyone who is required to provide information on the FAFSA. Pretty much every FAFSA is going to have at least one contributor, and that is the student. Now, if the student is independent, like if they've been legally emancipated, perhaps they are like a homeless unaccompanied minor with no contact with their parents, they are a parent themselves, there might be a couple situations when they might be the only contributor. However, usually you need at least one other contributor, and that's going to be at least one of your parents. Okay, so it used to be every other year it was the parent. If you don't live with both parents, if you live with just one or the other, it was usually the parent that you live with more often, like more than 50% of the time. However, that is no longer true. Okay, so let me get into a little bit about which parent or do both parents contribute. So they'll need to access and complete their section of the online form, just like the student needs to complete their own section. So an FSA ID will be your login to access the FAFSA application itself and to go back and check in on it every time. Okay, so this is really important. This is kind of the flow chart that tells you, okay, I have parents. Are they a contributor or not? Is one a contributor or both a contributor? What's the deal? If your parents are married to each other, then yes, you're going to report both parents' information, meaning both parents' income if they have any, on the FAFSA. So that is like kind of the easy scenario. If your parents are not married to each other, the next question would be, do your parents live together? If they do live together, if the answer is yes, then again, they're both going to need to be contributors. So both parents' information is going to be needed on the FAFSA. But if they do not live together, if the answer is no, that leads you to another question, which is which parent provided more financial support in the last 12 months? So this is very different than which one do you live with, which provided more financial support. Now, even though it's up to you to say which one provided more financial support, you might want to consider things like, does one or the other or both claim you on their taxes as a dependent? Okay, you might want to consider which one pays for your living expenses, which one pays for health insurance, which one pays for food, which one, and all those, there's many, of course, different expenses, right, and involved. So they would like you to estimate, if your parents are not married and do not live together, which one provides you more financial support in the last 12 months. Now, is that parent remarried? If they are remarried, then your two contributors are going to be that parent and that parent's spouse. So your parent and your step parent, their information. But if that parent that provides more financial support is not remarried, okay, then you would report only that parent's information. In other words, you would have only one contributor. As a parent, you'd have the student contributor and a single parent contributor. All right. And also, the only people considered parents are parents and those who have legally adopted you. If someone is your temporary guardian or a grandparent or something like that, that's not what the FAFSA is asking for. They are specifically asking for your parents. I know there's special situations. Sometimes you don't have contact with a parent, and we'll there's another process for that. But I know sometimes we get into some really special circumstances, but this is the basic information in terms of who are the contributors, which parent, or both. Any questions that I need to address out loud, Tori or Charmaine? Okay.
No, I don't think so. There was a grandparent question that had been asked, but I think you just answered it, and it sort of contradicts what I had understood. So I'd like the person to go by your advice.
Okay, yeah, unless that grandparent has legally adopted the student, they're probably going to ask for, again, the parent information, not the grandparent's information. It depends though, if the student is considered, if they're not homeless, if they have a home, they're living with a grandparent, for example. It can depend on who, if anyone, claims the students for tax purposes. But sometimes you even have a parent that's like living out of the country, and they fill out taxes in another, currency besides US dollars. And then you have to kind of try to do your best to convert that to US dollars and report that currency. So yeah, they're not gonna almost ever ask for like grandparent, aunt, uncle information. Even if the student is living with that person, they're almost always gonna ask for parent information.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Okay. So all parent or parents who are contributors do have to have an FSA ID. All right. So they're going to need to know your name, your birth date, your social security number if you have one. If you don't have one, that's okay. There's going to be another process. And we're going to, like I said, learn the protocol beginning tomorrow about how those parents will, like what questions they'll be asked, since they won't be asked for their social security number. An address, a phone number, an email address, and again, use an email address that you have access to. Also, it has to be a different email address than your student. The student and parent cannot share an email address. It has to be a different email address. After completing their FSA ID, the parent or parents have to do that same thing where they write down their username, their password, and their backup code. Okay, so this is for current 12th graders only. If you're in 11th grade or younger, you cannot do this yet. This has to be somebody who is a 12th grader who's going to be I shouldn't say 12th grader, someone who's going to be graduating, say like in June of 2024. So this is only for someone who doesn't have an FSA ID yet. But someone who is not too young. So if you're a junior, if you're a sophomore, if you're a freshman, you're too young, you can't create this yet. You do have to wait. But if you're a 12th grader, you can create it now. So this is what the website looks like, studentaid.gov. And you'll see in the top right, there's a little create account, and that's where you're going to get started. Okay, so literally the first thing you do is go to get started. Okay, and then they're going to ask, what's your first name, a middle initial, and a last name, your date of birth, your social security number. The parents without a social security number just have a box to check saying, I don't have a social security number. The account is kind of attached to your social security number if you have one, and that's something that's literally run through the Social Security Administration. So if you have a social, you do need to report it, and you can only have one account per person. So you do need to remember or save your password. All right. Okay. You can create a username that you will remember. Okay, I know you've done this for probably a million different accounts online before. So create a username that's memorable to you. Provide an email address that you think you'll have for a long time. Again, I recommend you do not use a school provided email address. Create a safe password, something with an uppercase and a lowercase letter included, a number included, a special character. I know they say don't use personal information, and you say, well, then how am I supposed to remember it? And I understand that point of view, but you do want to make something that is as secure as possible. And if it is something that's difficult to remember, please write it down or save it in a safe place. Because again, you'll need that every single time you log into the Federal Student Aid website, and you'll need it to complete your FAFSA. Another thing they'll ask for is your permanent address, and they'll also ask for a phone number, and they'll prefer a cell phone account for recovery. So in other words, if you forget your username and password, but they have a cell phone, they can send you a text or a message to recover your account. And so that's why they will also ask for that. So if you have that, that's definitely preferred if you can provide them with a cell phone. They'll also ask communication preferences, like would you rather be contacted by email, and that's what we recommend, it's the fastest, or by postal mail. And then also they'll ask you for a language preference. And for the first time, they're going to be able to translate questions on the FAFSA into, I think it's something like 9 different languages, including Spanish. And so that's kind of nice that you'll be able to have language preference as something that you can enter in there. So go ahead and answer that question whatever way you prefer. They're also going to have you choose some challenge questions. So it can be something, it's probably, they're usually like, what street did you grow up in? Or what is your pet's first name? Or what's your mother's maiden name? Or, you know, different, what did you dress up for us? What was your favorite Halloween costume? Or things like that. But they're things that if you forget your password, they'll ask you one of these challenge questions so that then you can, answer it and be able to still access your account, or make sure that it's something that you remember the answer to. So if it's like, what's your favorite color? Make sure that you know your favorite color and you're not fickle and it doesn't change every month. All right. Okay. Then you'll be asked to double check and verify that everything is correct. They'll say confirm and verify. I know this seems very easy to skip, but you just want to make sure your name is spelled correctly. It looks the same way that it looks on your birth certificate or social security card. Make sure that your address is correct, your email address. I can't tell you how many times people enter, for example, that their email is gmail.com, C-O-N, instead of .com, C-O-M. I know it's simple, but M and N are right next to each other on the keyboard. So it's the tiniest things like that. You also want to make sure, like, if they're asking your birthday and it's the student's birthday, put the student's birthday. There are many times where the student accidentally transposes their birthday for the parent's birthday, or their, name for the parent's name, their social for the parent's social, something like that. So just make sure that you're entering the correct information for the correct person. And then check your phone and your email for the codes to verify your account. They will send you a 6-digit code if you're providing your cell phone. This may take a little bit of time. It might not be instant, but when you do get it, it'll expire after 30 minutes. The updated FSA ID will also have an authenticator app. So that if you want to use that app, you can. It is recommended to use all 3 account recovery options. So cell phone is one and email address is another one. So just in case something happens, it's good to have backup, both an email address and maybe a backup email and a cell phone number if possible. Okay. So CalSOAP is here to support you, and we're going to try to open it up to some questions that hopefully we can do our best to answer. Our website is calsoapsandiego.org. Again, we have a webinars and blog tab where this is going to be posted tomorrow along with a slide deck, etc. We're also on Instagram at CalSOAP San Diego. We're on Facebook and X Twitter at San Diego CalSOAP, and we also have a YouTube channel. You can see this flyer here that shows some of our events that are happening in the upcoming year. Specifically for financial aid, most of what we're focused on right now is helping students and parents get their FSA IDs and get those done and ready, making sure that you have your 2022 taxes done, making sure that you have a different email address, student and parent each have their own, and getting ready so that when the FAFSA opens in late December, you'll see in January and February, a lot of events like on Saturdays, on evenings, both virtual and in-person events where you can come and actually ask questions about your specific FAFSA, like, how do I answer this question? Where do I put my 529 savings plan? What if my mom doesn't file taxes because she makes under 60,000 a year? What do I, like all these questions we can try to help you with one-on-one. And we do have other webinars and things coming up as well. So all that information is available on our website. So I want to go ahead and thank you for joining. I'll stop sharing screen, and now we will hopefully get into, if there's any questions, we can address those. So Toria or Charmaine, are there any questions that you wanted to make sure that I address for everybody, or if there's anything coming into the Q&A now? Or were you able to address everything that was asked? Looks like there's one now. Clarify about applying. If both parents file taxes as married joint, do we have to fill out the application separately? No, you do have the option. If you're married and you file taxes jointly, you have the option to just have one, be considered quote unquote one contributor, because it's one tax form that you're filing. So you don't, each parent, even though each parent is technically a contributor, you can, for purposes of the FAFSA, you can have a single FSA ID and username and password, just one for both parents if you're filing jointly. That's a good question. What is the cutoff for financial aid? Example, 80,000 plus. Okay, so this is a complicated question because it depends on what kind of financial aid. So for example, There's actually very high thresholds for things like the PLUS, the parent loan for undergraduate students, where the income can be quite high, but there is a lot of need-based aid like the Pell Grant and the Cal Grant, where the ceiling for income might be quite low. It's going to depend on your state, where you're going to college, the size of your family, and the amount of income. There's not one number that's just like, this is the magic number where if you have less than this, you're getting aid, and if you have more than this, you're not getting aid. But I will say that, for example, say for the UCs, the University of California, if the family income is under $80,000 a year, you would at least at minimum qualify for the Blue and Gold, which is if you're a full-time student, you'd qualify for 4 years of tuition at a UC, for example. So it depends on the university, it depends on the grant, it depends on family size, family income. The other thing I want people to know, though, is that even if they say, why am I doing this? My income always seems to be too high. If I'm getting back what used to be an EFC, which is now going to be called an SAI, a student aid index, which will range anywhere from negative 1,500 up to like, it could be thousands of dollars. You know, I think that my SAI is too high. I'm not qualifying for anything except for loans. I tell people to please keep this in mind, that the college's financial aid office will want you to have filled out a FAFSA or a DREAM Act, and they want to be able to see the SAI. I know that it's another hoop to jump through, as in it's a form that you have to fill out, but a lot of colleges reserve their scholarships and even their merit-based aid for students who have filled out a FAFSA or DREAM Act, regardless of what the SAIE is. So even if it's a merit-based form of aid, they won't give anybody aid unless you filled out a FAFSA, a DREAM Act, or if you can't do one of those, a CSS profile. So they sometimes even if you're not getting a federal or a state money after filling out the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, you might be getting money directly from the colleges, the college financial aid office itself. But before they will award you money, they want to see that you have filled out the form. So, and there's not just one amount I could give, like just say, well, if you have under this income, you'll definitely get money. It's impossible to tell. It's a complicated formula. But I will say that, you know, it helps you even get scholarships that you think might not be related to it. All right. Let's see monetary gifts from relatives or inheritance distributions. Good question. I'm going to specifically say if it is an inheritance distribution, I'm going to ask you to ask a financial advisor or a tax expert about that specifically, because I know there's been some recent ruling about that type of thing. So I don't want to give you the wrong advice, and I would definitely say to contact a financial advisor or a tax advisor about that question. Usually if it's under a certain amount, it might or might not have to be listed. The thing is, the student is one contributor and the parent is another. So it depends. For example, is that inheritance going to the student or to the parent? There's a lot of questions, and I don't want to give the wrong advice. So I would say for that question, I would say to ask a tax advisor. Still a guardian question. I've been given 2 different answers regarding guardianship requirements. One financial advisor advised guardians do not have to apply for FSA ID and provide income assets, and tonight it appears I might have to. Is there a federal site I may go to make sure? So I would say actually go to studentaid.gov or call their 800 number to ask your specific question and tell them your specific situation. Because usually, again, if you are a legal guardian, yes, you would have to, you're the person who's going to be the contributor. But if you're not a legal guardian, then you might not have to, and it might go back to the parent. So I would say to actually contact federal student aid. And again, they have they have like a chat bot, they have an email address, and they have a phone number you can call. And let me see if I can just pull that up really fast to get that number. All right, so I'm going to post that 800 number in the chat. It's 1-800-4FED-AID. So 1-800-433-3243. And that's where I would ask that specific question. If you receive a grant now for 4 years and in later years, the parent income goes up substantially, will the student lose the grant? It's going to depend on the grant. It's impossible for me to say. Usually they're only going to offer a grant for 1 year ahead. So you go out, you fill out the FAFSA basically once a year. And so as a college student, every year you're in college, you continue to still fill it out. So they usually are only going to promise something for the next year. But it might say like it's guaranteed for up to 4 years, but they only kind of offer it a year at a time. And they have to do that because of annual budgets and fundings changing and things like that. So if your income goes up substantially, the student might be eligible for the grant 1 year and might not be eligible for it the next year. It's possible. It's just going to depend on the grant. How to address funds a student might have from a legal settlement? That's a really good question. And again, that's one that I would probably ask either a financial advisor, a tax advisor, or you might want to call the 800 number or use the chat bot or email to contact the FAFSA themselves. I don't want to give you the wrong information. Is there a workshop I can attend to fill out the application? Yes. Go to calsoapsandiego.org, and starting in January, we'll have a ton of them in January and February, both online and in person, where there will be opportunities where you can come and get help with actually filling out your specific form. Another question, if you applied for the FAFSA, do I need to apply for CSS profile also? What's the difference between the two? Excellent question. Okay, I didn't really talk about the CSS profile, but I will mention what it is. Okay, so the CSS profile is a financial aid form that we call it the nosy cousin of the FAFSA. What it is it's an additional form that will ask you even more specific questions than the FAFSA does. It gets deep into your finances. It wants to know even more than the FAFSA does. And there are some especially private universities, that in addition to the FAFSA, they would also like a parent to fill out the CSS profile in addition. And sometimes it's the only thing students can fill out if they're not eligible to fill out the FAFSA. So let me just bring up that website, and that I can drop a link in the chat so you can see like, which colleges request it. And if you need to fill it out, you're only going to need to fill it out if the college that the student is going to asks for it. And usually, again, they're usually asking for it in addition to the FAFSA. If you are able to fill out the FAFSA. If you're not able to fill out the FAFSA, you might have to do it instead of a FAFSA or DREAM Act. But CSS profile is run through the College Board. They're the same people who give the SAT. And again, this is just kind of like an additional, more specific financial aid questions that they're going to ask about parents, assets, investments, things like that. So it's even more specific financial aid information. Do you need to fill out both? You want to check that page and see if the college your student's interested in is on that page where they require the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA. If they don't require it, then you don't need to fill out the CSS profile. On our high school's financial aid webinar, they said we both needed an FSA ID. So we both applied for one. So now what? Just use one as we move forward. So if it's fine either way. If both parents are contributors, they can each have their own FSA ID. If they file jointly, they don't necessarily need that because it's going to show up anyway when you report the taxes. But it's okay if you have two. You're not limited to using one. If you're married and you file jointly, each parent can have their own FSA ID and use it, and that's completely fine. It's just that they don't have to if they're filing jointly, but it's totally fine if they do. All right. I don't see any open questions at this point. And we're at about 6:50, so almost at the end of our hour. But what I am going to do is I'm going to put my email address in the chat. I think you all have it since you registered, but my email is 2Ks, kkWhitaker@ucsd.edu. If you have more specific questions after this, you can ask. I see Tori's answering one last question. But if you do have questions, please let me know. And if there's something really specific, I'll try to do some specific research just for your situation. Like if you have a unique family situation, like the legal guardianship question that we got asked, if you have something like that, let me know so that I can do further research and hopefully be able to help you with a more specific answer. Sometimes we don't know things off the top of our head, especially because the FAFSA is not out yet, but we will try to look into that and research further for you further. But at this time, I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to go to our website tomorrow, calsoapsandiego.org. Look for that webinar blogs tab, and you'll be able to see a recording, and you'll be able to see a slide deck. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join us tonight. And hopefully we'll see you in the future when we maybe can help you fill out your FAFSA or your DREAM Act or your college application or anything else. Again, I'm Carla Whitaker, KK Whitaker at ucsd.edu. A big thank you to Tori and to Charmaine for helping with the questions tonight. Really appreciate you. And we will go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.